Welcome to our Death Rituals series, a series dedicated to exploring how cultures around the world honor death, grief, and remembrance. From the vibrant altars of Dia de los Muertos to the quiet precision of traditional embalming, from indigenous mourning ceremonies to the inked memorials of modern tattooists. Each episode uncovers how humans give meaning to loss through ritual, through intimate conversations with those who tend to death, museum curators, artists, cultural leaders, and funeral professionals. We look at how ceremony, creativity, and community transform grief into connection. It's about the universal ways we celebrate, remember, and carry forward the lives of those who came before us. Revealing how we face death says everything about how we choose to live. Today, we are joined by Christina Mariscal Pasten. As the daughter of merchants herself, Christina is a founding board member of the Olvera Street Merchants Association. Olvera Street is a historical street in Los Angeles, which served as the center of Spanish and Mexican life in the early 1900s. The mission of the Olvera Street Merchants Association Foundation is to celebrate, promote, and preserve an understanding and an appreciation of the historical significance that Olvera Street has played in the formation of Los Angeles. The merchants of Olvera Street have been celebrating Dia de los Muertos for decades, with a 9-day-long festival. The celebration incorporates the pre-Columbian Aztec, Mayan, and Catholic rituals surrounding death. Enjoy.
Christina Mariscal Pasten, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to speak with you about Dios de los Muertos and the Olvera Street Merchant Association Foundation, which I know you speak of as OSMAF, is that correct?
Yes.
So I'm so thrilled to have you here and to dive into this fascinating and culturally significant ritual.
I'm excited to be here and happy to share more about our tradition with you.
Amazing. I always like to start hearing a little bit about where you grew up and what kind of kid you were.
So I actually say that I spent more time on Olvera Street than I did anywhere else. So I actually grew up there. There's where my family shop is located, there's a fountain next to it. And there was a running joke that I was actually born in the fountain and my mom just came to work the next day. I've been there since birth. And so I'm an only child, so I'm very much your type A checklist kind of kid. But I was also very outgoing, and that's in huge part to my upbringing there on Olvera Street, just constantly being around people from all walks of life, not just locals. We would have tourists from all over the world, and it was just such a cool place, I think, to grow up. I think when I was into my teenage years, I was probably like, ugh, why do I have to be here all the time? But as an adult, I so appreciate that my parents got to bring me to work with them every day and that I got to be exposed to so much, not just in terms of the people, but politically, historically, culturally. And that's something that I carry with me to this day and try to impart in a way to my own kids. So
why don't you tell listeners a little bit about Olvera Street, because many of them may not be familiar.
Sure. Olvera Street, as it's known today as an outdoor Mexican marketplace, was founded in 1930. And I'll get to that in a bit. But before that, it was really just the heart of the pueblo. So when the city of Los Angeles was formally established with the church, because as we know with a lot of the colonization, the church was the centerpiece. And so across the church was the plaza, and that plaza still exists today. And so that was really the heartbeat of the city. That's where people would come for baptisms and for other events at the church, but then come for entertainment there in the plaza. And then in the late 20s, there was a woman named Christine Sterling, a white woman from San Francisco who had moved to Los Angeles and was in love with the Mexico or the Spanish style that she would see in movies, and thought, let's bring that to life here. And so Olvera Street from its inception was meant to be a tourist attraction. And what she did was repave the oldest street there, which had the oldest home, which was the Avila Adobe, which the governor of California once lived in, the mayor, and there were just some old dilapidated buildings that she helped to restore. In those days, she could call on the folks in charge, and she got men from the city jail to come and lay the brick. And so if like you think about that context in today, like that would be something unheard of. And so they laid the red brick that is still there today and is very iconic of Olvera Street. And in 1930, Olvera Street opened. And basically, she had put a call out to local artisans in the community or local vendors of Mexican descent who wanted to come and set up shop and sell their wares. My great-great-grandfather was one of them. And so we were one of the very first families there on Olvera Street when the doors opened in 1930. And we have continued the legacy. My parents still run the shop every day, and they've been running it together since the early 80s, since about 1981, 82. And my sons continue to participate in the traditional events at Olvera Street, and it made us one of the first families with 6 generations active at Olvera Street.
What an amazing legacy. What is the shop that your grandparents opened, and is it the same sort of wares today, or has it changed over time?
So when they first opened, they did a lot with straw hats and with some pottery. And what was interesting, I learned this later on in life, is that 1930, we're talking the Great Depression. And so you can imagine this being a difficult time for folks. And here we are opening up shop and opening up a tourist attraction. And I feel like I think that makes me so grateful to that, what we call ganas in Spanish, like that something inside of you, that fire that pushes you through even when it's most difficult. And so to think that we were in a Great Depression and here are these Mexican and Mexican American folks setting up shop. And my great-great-grandfather was one of the merchants who would actually drive to Tijuana on a regular basis and bring merchandise back for other merchants. And so also thinking about the danger of being on the road with a car full of stuff. So what started out somewhat simple has evolved over time. We are known as a souvenir shop. So a lot of the things are like little knickknacks you could pick up in Mexico. But we also have stuff that's for California or Los Angeles because we get tourists from all over the place and they want to pick things up. I think over the last 20 years in particular, my parents have put a lot of time and focus into local artists that are from LA, and they sell a lot of original work that's some religious and a lot of Day of the Dead artwork in particular.
Okay, and we'll get into that. So tell us about the Olvera Street Merchant Association Foundation. When did that begin, and what is its primary charter?
Sure. So the foundation was actually established in 2005, and it was done so because we were celebrating an anniversary year from Olvera Street's establishment in 1930, and we wanted to do more events where we could fundraise in order to keep these traditions going. And so at the time we were receiving funding from one of the city's like arts commissions, but we wanted to do more and be able to raise awareness that it's not just the cultural events, but we really see the merchants themselves as historical tenants, if you will, and keepers of traditions and of information, and wanted to make sure that we were able to continue passing that down to new generations and to the public at large. And so the foundation was created to be our nonprofit arm, and that's how we continue to do fundraising through our traditional events.
So are all of the merchants on Olvera Street, do they all have historical ties to the association, or how is that sort of moderated as time goes on?
Yeah, so the foundation itself has a governing board, and I'm part of that. I was one of the founding members, but the benefits of it go to Olvera Street as a whole. In addition to that, the merchants meet somewhat regularly with the commission. So we're governed by El Pueblo Monument, and they are operated as a city entity. So the city of Los Angeles is essentially the landlord for the merchants, And so there's a lot of information that goes back and forth that way. And so the merchants will meet regularly with the commission that's been assigned to oversee El Pueblo as a monument, and then the park management as well. And so really for the foundation, it's always been about the greater good, about sharing the information with others, but then also to bring that back to Olvera Street, right? So if our events are well attended, then people are shopping. Right? If our events are getting recognized on social media, people are coming and they're shopping. So that's the whole point, is that they're coming down, they're patronizing the businesses there and the restaurants there, and they're getting a little piece of history, even if it is somewhat commercialized, because that's what it was intended to be. And I think some people forget that Olvera Street was designed to be this stereotypical Mexico of old that you saw in the movies in the 20s and 30s. And it's, in some ways it's changed, and in other ways it's also exactly the same.
So let's say a family who has had a shop on Olvera Street for several generations decides not to continue with the shop. Is there a way to preserve the historical legacy for a new shop that comes in? Is that something that the foundation is involved in, or is that really just the city that manages that?
So I would say that falls more on the city side, on the El Pueblo side, because they are the caretakers of the physical space and of the site. And the city has traditionally also had a historian on their staff that has collected stories. So there's actually been a few historians in my time being involved with Olvera Street that have done videos or have written books or have taken oral histories. So that exists in some cases. I think that there are other folks who it's also been hard for them after they leave. So unfortunately, during the pandemic, a handful of merchants did step away from their businesses. They just felt like they weren't able to keep going. And I think they're not the only ones. I think that was something we saw across the country, across the world. And I think for some of them, they've had a hard time even coming back to visit, because that was so much part of their family and their legacy, and it would be really tough. And it's also opened the doors to have that conversation with my own parents, who have been operating the shop for so long, and knowing that I have a career that's outside of Olvera Street because that's what they wanted for me, but then also feeling, are you going to take it over, or is it something where we say, my dad right now says he wants to make it to 2030. That's when it's Olvera Street's 100th, and he turns 75, and maybe he'll think about retiring. So we'll see what comes there. But really, I'm leaving it up to him more than to me, because I think this is all he's known. He has literally been there every day since he was 5 years old. He came out of high school and immediately was there at the shop. He worked in the shop when his uncle was managing it and running it. And then when his uncle passed away, he took it over with my mom. So this is something that it is our legacy, and it is a big part of our family and our heart. But also the reality of, you said, when I was a kid growing up, it wasn't an if you go to college, it was when you go to college, right? I knew nothing else. And my parents, my mom has an AA, and my dad did not go to college at all. And so for these self-employed folks to just have the foresight to be like, my kid's going, my kid's doing, I carry that with me, and that's what motivates me every day. But also, I love my job, I love my career, and would have a really hard time leaving that behind to run the shop, but would find a way to work it out. My husband and I have talked out several scenarios of how we could make it work. But again, we feel like it's not our decision solely. It really is what my dad wants and how he wants to continue.
Yeah. What's so interesting to me is that your legacy is both tied specifically to Olvera Street and the shop, and also your legacy is tied to your pursuit of other endeavors that your parents really wanted for you. And that's just as much your legacy.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be interesting in the decade to come for Olvera Street as a whole.
I agree. And I think too that I think there's a lot of talk about what the American dream still looks like in present day. And I think that they are living it. They are working. They have provided for me to be able to go to school and to have the freedom and the flexibility that I do now. And I see it in my boys who are already surpassing me in technology, in just like how clever they are, and thinking about what are they going to be like in 10 years, in 20 years, and what do they want. And I think Olvera Street will always be a part of our family in some way. I just don't know what it's going to look like over the next 10 years.
So you said that you grew up on Olvera Street.
I did.
What has that experience been like for your children?
So I think because I was there so much, I wanted to create a buffer for them. And I did that intentionally because there was a time in like my teen years that I don't want to say resented. I feel like resent is a strong word, but that I really struggled with like, why do I have to be here all the time? And I know now as an adult, everything, hindsight is 20/20. I know now that my parents, that's what they knew, and that I was actually very lucky to be with them so much. I got to spend so much time with them, and that's something that a lot of parents don't always have the privilege of doing because they're working all the time. And I see that myself where, my husband and I, we're working all the time. Thankfully, he works from home. I'm hybrid. So we have a little bit more flexibility and have that time with our kids. But I'll give you an example. On the weekends, all I ever wanted was to like sleep in, have pancakes for breakfast, and just hang out. And I only got to do that when I stayed with my grandma, because my parents, we had to get up and go. And that was it, and that was the norm. And I didn't want that part for my kids because I wanted them to have more of a life outside of my work or their work. But what I will say is that since they were babies, they've been participating in all of the cultural events. My oldest son also grew up there. Before he started preschool, he was there every day with my parents because I was working full time, and so he had the most time there. My younger son was born just before the pandemic hit, so he had just started. I had just gone back to work after maternity leave, and he had just started being there when the pandemic hit and everything pulled back. So I will say that they've had that exposure where they are there, where they get to see different people. What I love now is that they like being part of the events. So we do a 9-day celebration for Dia de los Muertos, 9 days at the holidays for Las Posadas. We do the blessing of the animals, and they are right there by my side doing all the things. And that to me feels really special because I did it growing up, and now to be able to see them be the angels in the posadas. Or my little one who is 6, and he took the mic at the blessing of the animals and was just like so natural. I didn't have to tell him what to say, and he's chatting up the people. I was like, okay, so if we do stick around, we have one that's gonna be behind the scenes and one that's ready to grab the mic and take over.
It's so fascinating. I have 2 boys as well, and same gene pool, and they have such different personalities, and They gravitate towards different things, which is what's beautiful. But that's wonderful. The generations pass, times change, and there is still this pull through time connecting you and your family to Olvera Street, and I'm quite sure you're not alone in that. And that is really a beautiful, special thing in today's world where I feel like so often we feel like nothing stays the same. So that's really beautiful. So my understanding is that Dia de los Muertos has been celebrated for nearly 40 years on Olvera Street. Is that true?
Yes, I think the version we have now has been in the last 20 years.
Okay. So tell us, for listeners who don't know about Dia de los Muertos, and then tell us about, let's say, the celebration you've had over the last 20 years.
Sure. Dia de los Muertos is a time when we honor our loved ones who have passed, who are no longer with us. And it's really, if you think about what it looks like in Mexico and Latin America today, it's a fusion of Catholic rituals and indigenous rituals. So in the indigenous communities, there was always a way to honor the dead, and they would do it through ofrendas or altars, where in their home they would prepare a beautiful display with a photo of a loved one. Before photos existed, it was their favorite food, it was their favorite drink, it was something that represented that person. And the idea behind it is that the spirits come and see your ofrenda, and they take what you've prepared for them and they take that back into the afterworld, whatever that looks like. And over time, because again, through colonization, there was this push for Catholicism, but the indigenous people still wanted to practice their ways of doing things. And so in the Catholic tradition, you now have All Souls and All Saints Day, which is celebrated November 1st and 2nd, and that has become tight aligned with Dia de los Muertos with the indigenous practices as well. So at Olvera Street, what we have done over the last roughly 20 years is we mix all of those things. So we have a nightly procession and we do a 9-day celebration. We start every year on October 25th and it runs through November 2nd, which is the final day. And we are led by a group called Tatalejos. This is a group of individuals who have traveled multiple times in a year to indigenous communities in Mexico to learn their traditions. And it's through that process that they receive lessons, prayers, parts of different indigenous communities that they are then able to bring back and share with the people here in Los Angeles. So there's different, I would say prayers, but almost like poems that they share. There's different practices that they bring. And so they're the group that leads us in our procession. And then they do our ceremony every night. And in the procession, they are followed by the family. So each night of the procession, we honor a different merchant family or a community member that has passed. And then in the ceremony, they get to share a few words about that loved one or loved ones that they're honoring. So it's the family, and then it's the Aztec dancers with the full feathers and all their regalia, and they are the ones that are anchoring us to those indigenous traditions. They have the drum. They are the ones bringing us together. After the Aztec dancers, we have the banda. The banda is something that's more modern. So in many towns in Mexico, particularly small towns, you have these bands with the trumpet and the saxophone and the large bass drum and the tuba. And they perform for weddings, funerals, for everything. But when someone passes, the banda actually parades through the small town. And it's not meant to be something sad, but it's really remembering and honoring and celebrating the life that they had. And so we have the banda, and then coming up at the back are our what we call our muertitos. And so these are folks who are dressed up in folklorico dresses and other costumes, but full skeleton masks. Because at the end of the day, underneath, we're all bone, right? This is a way of poking fun at that and being playful. And so you see these skeletons in brightly colored costumes, and that's what makes the procession. And then when we have the ceremony, the Aztec dancers perform. We do a community dance where people from the public are invited to join. And then the part that always I find most beautiful is we make a circle on the ground of marigolds, which is the cempasúchil flower, which is representative of this time. And the reason the cempasúchil is so important is because its color and its smell, its odor, its aroma is what guides the spirits back. So people, especially in Mexico, will make trails of the cempasúchil from the cemetery to the home so that the spirits can find their way to the ofrenda that is waiting for them. And so we make that circle of the marigolds on the ground, again, rooting us. There's a lot of reference to the elements. So we sweep away the dirt with water, right? So there's always water, fire, earth, and wind. And we place the photo of the person we're honoring in the center of that circle with a representative of their family. And that's the person who gets to speak. And so it's just one thing that I always say, because I'm also the MC for that, is that death touches all of us. Like no one is exempt from experiencing loss or from dying, because it will happen to all of us. And so our traditions teach us that it's part of life. It's not something to be feared. It's not something to sweep away under a rug, but to really hold it as part of who we are, so that we can continue honoring those who came before us.
And why is it 9 days?
I feel like that's an Olvera Street thing, but okay. I think I will be honest with you. The 9 days originates from the novena. So in Catholic tradition, when you pray when someone passes, or when you're praying for something that's really important, you do a novena 9. So it's for 9 days, and you pray the rosary for 9 days. And so I'm 92% sure that the older generations at Olvera Street were like, 9 days, it's the novena, it makes sense. But it's also, if you think about, because we also do 9 days for Christmas at Las Posadas, and I think of it as like the 12 days of Christmas, right? That's the lead up to it. And so I think for us it's the same thing. It's the lead up to it, because there's so much that can be shared and so much that can be done. And it also gives folks that might be coming from far distances to participate if they can't be there on the main days of November 1st and 2nd.
Okay. Is this in the evening? Is there a specific time every day that it begins and ends?
Yes. So we build community altars, ofrendas, in the plaza area. It's really beautiful. And basically, if you think of the plaza, there's a gazebo in the middle, and then it's surrounded by these giant planters on the outside. And so that inside space, we put all of the community altars. So you're walking around, and it's just different altars that community members have made. Those are on display 24/7 during our festival. And then the procession is every night at 7 p.m. We start the same time every day. We have the ceremony. And so it looks somewhat the same every day in terms of the procession, but the ceremony is always a little bit different, because it depends on who we're honoring and what the focus is of that particular evening. So in addition to the community member, it might be we're honoring those who died, anybody who died in a war. We might be honoring those who died far from their home. We did a special night for victims of wildfires, particularly this year because of the Eaton Canyon and the Palisades fires, right? So it's like we are always looking to also think about what's going on around us and acknowledging and honoring those folks as well.
And is this something that you also do at home? And not just you, but is this, and obviously you can't speak for everybody, but the people that are part of your community, is this something that is a continued tradition, having the ofrenda and talking about death, talking about the ones we've lost, talking about how death is part of life and that we shouldn't fear it, and passing along these traditions and these beliefs to your children?
I can't speak for my Olvera Street colleagues. I think everybody does their things differently. In our home, it's something that we do talk about and we do practice. And actually, this year was particularly special. My oldest son, who's in 5th grade, did a whole unit on Dia de los Muertos, and he made his own shoebox ofrenda. And it's still sitting in our living room because we didn't want to take it down, and he did it for my father-in-law. But he asked my husband so many questions, and we didn't see the write-up. We didn't see anything. He just asked the questions. He got all the materials, and he created it himself. And it was such a beautiful thing. And I think what got my heart more was that his teacher said that he became the teacher, that he was sharing how they do things at Olvera Street and why you put these things on the altar. And that speaks volumes, I think, of what we're trying to instill in our kids. And it just felt so beautiful to see that, and that he had the pride in himself, like that he was so happy to be like, oh, this is my family, this is what I do with them. And so when we don't have the mini ofrenda, we do have our own, where we've done big ones and we've done little ones. I've done everything from like a small card table to we have a little like buffet cabinet, then we've covered the whole thing. And so an altar and ofrenda can be whatever you want it to be, and you make it your own. It doesn't have to have every single thing. Like your altar, if you made one, is going to look different than mine because it's yours, and that's what it should be. I think you always have the main elements with fire, so we use incense. You always have water because our spirits are thirsty when they come to our homes. You have food, usually some kind of fruit as well is really important, and a little bread. And then you want to have salt as well because that's what represents the earth. And your candle, and so you have candles, but the rest of it is really you can have the papel picado, the streamers, you can have the sugar skulls, you can have the photos. I think are the most important thing because that's what connects you to the person. And then you put a little something favorite of theirs. For example, when my son did the one for my father-in-law, he's a big sports fan, so he had a little football and a little soccer ball there for him, and he had his favorite candy. And so those are the kinds of things that make it so special. It's not about how it looks necessarily, but it's about what it means to you. And I think what in my time leading some of the events at Olvera Street, what I have found is people have a deep connection to what we're doing. Just this year for our Day of the Dead celebration, something new that the Tatalejos did was, in addition to the person we were honoring, they invited 5 or 6 members of the audience of the community to come forward, and they could speak the name of someone they were honoring. And there was a gentleman who came forward from Ireland, and he was with his young son, and he had lost his wife and the little boy's mother. And afterwards, I found him in the crowd, and I just said, I hope you enjoyed it. And he just said, this was the most beautiful thing I've ever been a part of. And that's why we do what we do, so that people maybe who haven't found a way to like they're still grieving, right? The grief never goes away. Like I say that I lost my grandmother in 2008, and I will have random moments where she is just in my head and I'm bawling, right? And grief never leaves us. It just manifests itself in different ways. And so if this can help somebody have a little bit of closure or relief, or feel like they know that person's out there, or that spirit is watching over them, or that spirit knows that their memory is not lost, then that's for me what makes it so personal and so fulfilling to keep doing these traditions the way that we do.
So what's interesting is that you're perpetuating this long-standing tradition for your people and inviting anyone into it to not only experience the culture tradition, but also hopefully some healing and peace. And so I lost my father 11 years ago to cancer, and I completely agree with you that grief never goes away. I think it changes and it comes and goes and it shifts, but nobody should expect it to go away. But I feel like the reason that I do an annual series having something to do with death and dying is that we don't talk about it enough, generally speaking. And that in this not talking about it, we make it harder. We feel more isolated. We're less in touch with the people that we've lost and ourselves. So what I love about not only the tradition, but Olvera Street's sharing the tradition is that it's inviting the entire community to participate in a way that really adds meaning to their lives.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I say from the mic when I'm emceeing is that regardless of race, religion, creed, gender, in that moment, we're one community because we are there to remember those who we loved so much and who we cared for so much. And I think that for some folks who maybe grew up more traditional, because there's also some folks from Mexico or even Mexican American where Day of the Dead was seen as that's other, right? We don't do that because we're Catholic or we're Christian or we're whatever. And I think what's beautiful is that when we start sharing with the community, they find that there are traditions in their own cultures. I'm talking about those who are not of Mexican or Latin American descent. They find traditions from their own cultures. They're like, oh, we do something similar, or we talk about it this way. And so I love that part of it, that we're far more similar than we are different. And I wish more people would just take a step back and understand that. And I think it would, and so opportunities like this really, I do feel, connect people to themselves. Maybe they learn something a little bit about themselves, but also about our culture and our traditions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. We are far more similar than we are different. At the end of the day, we're all human.
Yes.
Sometimes we seem to forget that. So you talked earlier, and I know that it's very important, that Dia de los Muertos is not a sad occasion.
Mm-hmm.
It's celebrating those that we've lost.
Yes.
I want to hear a little bit about grieving, and where is the place for the sadness if it's not in this tradition? Because when somebody dies, we do all have sadness and
Absolutely.
grief, and it's hard. I remember even in the days after my father died, I listened to a lot of music we listened to together and looked at like letters that he had written me. And I did have a lot of happy moments, and like moments when I would smile hearing something or thinking of something. But I was really overcome with sadness in those first days, and frankly, probably years. So I'm interested in understanding, like, where is the place for that heaviness? It's not here in this celebration, but where does it live?
I think it is partly here in this celebration, and I say that because one of the components of the ceremony that we do every night during our celebration is the person that is standing in the middle of that marigold circle. The community is invited to come and offer an embrace. And that is representative of traditions in many parts of Mexico and Latin America. When someone passes, the doors of the home are left open for 3 days and 3 nights so that the community may come and pay their respects, share food, share a story. And so I think that the grief is there. I think that even in the celebration, the sadness is there. Because in the same way that you are remembering the life that they lived, that's also a celebration. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're smiling. It could still be that you're holding that sadness and that grief. And I think for me, the same for the few years after my grandma passed away, I had a really hard time during this time of year because I missed her so much. And it took me a while to even make the ofrenda for her, because then it would be real that she was gone. And so I think the sadness is there. It's just a matter of how you process it and what you do with it. And for me personally, I found that I was very angry and I couldn't figure out why. And it all stemmed from her passing. And so I went to therapy because that's what worked for me. And I think that everybody has to find what that piece is for them of how they can come out of that sadness. But in the same way that they think the grief never leaves, I don't think the sadness really does either. It's just of how you process it and how you maybe channel it into something like a celebration like the one that we do at Olvera Street.
What are some misconceptions about Dia de los Muertos? Do you find these harmful to the cultural tradition, whether at Olvera Street and how it's celebrated there or just writ large?
Sure. So I think the one thing that I heard the most growing up, which is like still fascinating to me, is that especially like people would walk into my parents' shop and see the Day of the Dead artwork and they'd be like, oh, this is a devil thing. This is of the devil. And without even asking, without even pausing, and I always just found it really comical that if they had turned their head to the other side of the shop, they would see all of the religious statues and the rosaries and all the other things. So this is definitely not of the devil. Like, we wouldn't be selling both. And I think for me, that's maybe the biggest misconception, is that it's like dark or scary, because it is the opposite of that. It is meant to be light, and it is meant to be this outlook, like, of thinking about that person's life and all the things that, that you thought about them, that you remember of them. It's the same thing like when you give a eulogy, right? You're not going to sit there and go, this person was terrible. No, you're going to sit there and talk about the great things or the impact that they had. And for me, that's what Dia de los Muertos is too, is just remembering those parts of our loved ones. And so what I want people to take away from it is that it's okay to not know how to process those feelings. It's okay to have grief. It's okay to have sadness. But it's also okay to just know, man, it was really cool when they were part of my life, because they did X, or they always made me laugh, or they made the best meal, whatever it is. And I think just reminding people that just because it's a skeleton does not make it scary, does not make it bad or negative. And that if you just take a minute to look at what is behind all of it, you might actually find yourself connecting to it.
What have you learned from death rituals of other cultures that you incorporate, whether it's the various indigenous cultures, which I think is pre-Columbian, Aztec, Mayan, and then also, of course, you said the Catholic rituals, as well as people visiting, like this Irish man who might have been Catholic, but maybe Protestant, or who knows. Mm-hmm. What have you learned in your work with Olvera Street and Dia de los Muertos about how other cultures' death rituals have impacted how you view and honor death?
I think what I come to find is that there are other cultures who have similar rituals, where it's meant to be more of a celebration than it is of a grieving process. But I think what I have noticed most is that there's no religion tied to our celebration. So even though there's components of maybe the Catholic piece, just because of colonization and that's what is filtered in, it's not a religious ceremony. And I think that's what really gets people engaged or interested, is that this is purely about, I have experienced death, and this is how I process it, right? And this is how I can honor it or celebrate it. And I think that there are other traditions around the world that do similar things, but maybe usually it's tied to religion and not as much culture. And so I think people sometimes hesitate, because if they didn't grow up that way, or everybody has different relationships with religion, good, bad, or otherwise, they might not feel as inclined to do that ritual, or they might feel obligated because that's the right thing to do in their community. Here it's more of a, this is mine and I'm owning it, and this is how I can process for myself.
In a way, it almost sounds like exposure to other people's experiences around death has almost tied you even stronger to your own. I don't know if that's fair.
I think that is fair. And I think too, just when the indigenous tradition, they talk a lot about, and actually if you just bear with me a moment, I have some of the poems, the prayers that we share. They're like simple sayings, and these come from different communities, like the Purepeche, from other parts. They travel a lot to Michoacan and Oaxaca, and they're learning all of these different things. And so this one is, there are 5 circles: circle of the individual, circle of the group, circle of the tradition, and circle of the universe, and circle of the heart. And the idea is that you have all those circles, but they're all intertwined. right? It's something so simple, but these are the kinds of things that are shared. And then the other one is life is fleeting and it sleeps like a raft. The body is fleeting and it sleeps like a whisper. Life is fleeting and it wakes like the lightning. Life is fleeting and it wakes to be broken open. The eye does not see, the nose does not smell, the ear does not hear, and the tongue does not speak, but the soul remains intact. What do you say after that? It's beautiful. And then the other one is, where I am standing, I am the most important person, but in comparison to the universe, I am but a grain of sand. And so when you think about that and you think about how that lands on somebody, it doesn't matter what cultural background you have, you can relate to it in some way. And I think in our very small way, we're trying to do just that for the community members that come to join us.
And you also have a number of other traditions that you honor on Olvera Street. Can you tell us briefly about a couple of those?
Sure. So I think the other two big ones are Las Posadas, which are coming up December 16th through the 24th. And similar, we do a procession, we do a children's piñata every night, and that one is reenacting the journey of Mary and Joseph to Bethlehem. And we ask for shelter at a different shop each night. And then afterwards we give out bread and champurrado. So that one's it's family friendly, it's holiday celebration, and just a lot of fun. And that's something where when I was 3 years old, I was the lead angel, and now my boys are the lead angels. So it's just like a really sweet thing. That's probably my favorite part, is that I get to see them in that role. And then the other big one we do is a blessing of the animals, which is always the Saturday before Easter Sunday. And that is something that actually began before Olvera Street existed, in the Pueblo days, where the farmers in the area would bring some of their livestock to be blessed by the priest so that they would have a good yield for that year. And that tradition has gone on, where over time, then folks would start bringing their pets, and then it transformed into the Blessing of the Animals. And the Blessing of the Animals is actually one of the events that has been on Olvera Street since its inception in 1930.
Oh, wow.
And it's continued.
Amazing. What do you hope for in the future of Olvera Street?
I hope for, truthfully, more investment and attention from the city. The Olympics are coming up, and I think a lot of it is being focused to the west side. And there's where Olvera Street is, where neighbor Chinatown is a couple blocks away. Little Tokyo is not far down from us. We are the historical core of downtown Los Angeles, and we played a big role in the Olympics in the 30s, actually. One of the shops was actually like a house for Olympians to stay in. And so a lot of people don't know that. And we want more of that vibrancy to come back. So there's a handful of us that part of OSMAF who are continuing the traditional events. We do it through donations, through sponsorships, through fundraising, but we would love to see our mayor get more involved. We would love to see our city council members get more involved. We'd love to just see folks really take an interest and kind of help zhuzh it up a little bit. I think that we've been around so long that I sometimes feel like maybe Olvera Street is taken for granted, and we're this little gem, and it's only when there's a photo op that folks come. And I really want people to appreciate that it's not just the shops, but what Olvera Street represents for many Mexican Americans and for many Latinos. For a lot of them, this is the first place they land if they're new to this country, because they know they're going to find somebody who speaks Spanish. This is in the 30s. There were a lot of protests and political movement, and that happened in the plaza. right? We are truly the birthplace of Los Angeles, the area that we're at, the pueblo, the plaza, the church. And I would just love to see more notoriety for that and keep supporting the merchants there. They're literally mom and pop shops. My parents are mom and pop shop, and keeping their business going and keeping the legacy of Olvera Street as a whole and what it represents alive.
And where can people find more about Olvera Street?
So I would recommend going to olveraevents.com. That's our foundation website that has a little bit of our history, also the traditional events that we host. And then I would recommend they follow us on Instagram. It's at Olvera Street Official, and that's where we post all the happenings throughout the year.
Okay, amazing. And is there anything you would like listeners to remember about Dia de los Muertos as a death ritual and Olvera Street's honoring of this important tradition to take away?
I think I just want to invite them to see for themselves, to experience it, because I think that it's one thing to talk about it, it's one thing to see pictures of it or a video, but when you're there, there's a different feeling. And it's this notion that you may not know the person you're standing next to, but they're living and feeling the same thing you are in that moment. And I think that's something pretty special when there's so much noise around us, where you can just be focused in this moment of remembering somebody who maybe meant so much to you. And so I would just love to invite them to come see and to learn more about not just Olvera Street, but about Dia de los Muertos and how they can celebrate it in their own homes.
At the end of every episode, I like to ask the same 5 questions. The first one is, as we explore in my brand, Âme Atendre, which is French for to take care of your soul, objects can hold a lot of meaning for us. They can tie us to the past, enable us to enjoy the present, and sometimes even take us into the future. Mm-hmm. Can you share an object from your life, whether you still have it or not, that holds a lot of meaning for you, and tell us why?
When my grandmother passed, my mom and her sisters, each of us took a little bit of her jewelry, and I have these cameo earrings that she had, and I'm holding on to them. And I have 2 girl cousins. They don't know this, but I'm making them into necklaces for them when they get married, and one of them just got engaged, so I'm very excited for her, and so that they have a piece of my grandma, because they were so little when she passed. And so that's something that I hold on to. But I think something a little bit like more of a symbol. My husband and I, before we had kids, got to travel quite a bit. And one of the places we went to was Peru. And when we went to Peru, we found this beautiful little ceramic bowl. So the bowl is very symbolic in Peru. And it's hand painted clay, and it's just, there's nothing fancy about it. It was just something we saw and we were like, that's it. And for me, it's in our living room, and it's with some other statues and things that we have found from our travels. And I don't know why that one stands out to me as just being like one of the things I think we first bought together, and that just, I hope, motivates and encourages our boys to travel and to new adventures and to try things, because both of us were homegrown, and the school I went to had travel opportunities, and my parents always said yes. And I'm so grateful for that, because it gave me that exposure. And then as a young adult in college, I studied abroad, and then I got to go to different places, and I hope to instill that in my kids too. And so that was our first out of country trip together, was to Peru. And so to have that little bowl, it means a lot.
I love that. My husband is Peruvian, so We've spent a fair amount of time in Peru, and they do have beautiful artisanal objects.
Yes.
And I love this idea of both the bowl is a sort of a vessel for, frankly, your marriage, your relationship, and also this hope you have for your children to see the world and see the way other people live. I feel the same way about travel, and I spent some time abroad in college and have told my boys that's something that they need to do in college. And it's just important to travel and see the way that other people live, both to see the differences and the similarities.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Amazing. Can you share a favorite tradition? I mean, you've shared a lot about Dios de los Muertos, so maybe that's it, but maybe there's another one.
Yeah, I think our favorite one is Sunday night dinners. It's something so simple, but when I was a kid, growing up at Olvera Street, parents were always working. When I was about 7 or 8, my parents had saved up enough to buy their first home. Before that, we actually lived in an apartment behind my grandparents' house, so I got to see my grandparents a lot, and I'm very grateful for that. And Sundays, we would go out to a restaurant, and it wasn't anything fancy because self-employed folks, but it was a night out. And that continued into adulthood. I went to college here in Los Angeles, but way on the other side. And so my parents would still come for Sunday dinners before I had a car. And then when I had a car, I would come to them. And it's something that when I met my husband and I said, I told him a few things. I said, just know that during these dates, I'm booked for Olvera Street. So you're either on board or you're not. And we have dinner every Sunday with my parents. And so now it's something my boys look forward to. And we just had dinner with them last night. So we do Sunday night with my parents every week. And it's just something that warms my heart because the boys look forward to it. And they're like, oh, we're going with abuelos. And usually they get to, now that they're older, they get to pick the restaurant. So I think that's what they like, is that they get to pick something that they want.
Amazing. I love that tradition. Are you in a phase in your life where you enjoy entertaining in your home? Why or why not?
That's a complicated question, Ashley. So the answer is yes, I do enjoy it, but it's paused right now, and I'll tell you why. We actually live in Altadena, which was hit pretty hard by the Eaton fires. We're back in our home. Our home survived, but it took about 8 months. So we just moved back here in September, after the fire. And so I feel like we're still playing a little bit of cleanup and organizing and finding because we had to literally take everything out to be able to put it back in. And some stuff we had to get rid of. So I want to host folks. I think I'm just not ready quite yet.
Yeah, well, that's been a huge event in your life, in so many people's lives.
Yes.
Glad you're back in your house, and maybe in 2026.
Yes, yeah. We actually had just purchased this house. We sold our old house and moved here in May of 2024. So we had just had our first Christmas here, and we had our family over for New Year's, and then the fires hit. And so I don't know if we'll be ready for New Year's this year, but I'd love to have everybody back to ring in the new year. And we have a lot of nieces and nephews as I shared earlier, I'm an only child, but my husband is one of 7. So there's a lot of nieces and nephews, and they all came over and we played reindeer games and had dinner and hot chocolate and all that fun stuff. And so I'd love to do that again if we're physically and mentally ready for it.
You'll get there.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you have a few top resources? They could be books or websites, podcasts or courses that you could recommend. It could have to do with Olvera Street or Dios de los Muertos or not. A lot of times people just share like their favorite books, which I love to get book recommendations. So anything that comes to mind.
My favorite book, hands down, that I could read again and again is called Reign of Gold, and the author is Victor Villaseñor. And he has other books. He wrote Burro Genius and a few others that I'm blanking on right now. But Reign of Gold is the telling of his family's journey from coming out of the Mexican Revolution and landing in like San Diego in the Carlsbad area, and really their life's journey and what it meant to be Mexican, what it meant to be Mexican American. And it talks a lot about how he was raised by his mother and he grew up around his sisters, and so he had more what was considered like female, I don't want to say energy. I can't remember the exact phrasing. It's been a while since I've reread it, but thinking about how that grounded him and that how that gave him different perspective of how to walk through life, and for his father, I should say, not for him. And so it was just really an interesting book. I read it the first time as a teen and then read it again as an adult, and I've read his other books subsequently. And so I would say he's one of my favorite authors, but it's just a beautiful story. And because it's his own story, there's actually photos in there of his family, and it's really lovely. So I would say that. And then in terms of podcasts, don't judge me, but I am a big crime junkie. I love like true crime stuff. But the other one that I listen to a lot with my kids, which do yourself a favor and get Forever Ago or Brains On. My kids love those. And Greeking Out, which is it's a National Geographic podcast about all things Greek mythology. And my son, who devoured the Percy Jackson series, I started looking for podcasts, and Greeking Out came up, and we have listened to every single episode. So learned a lot that way. And then the other one that I actually really like is Work Life with Adam Grant. That's another one. And actually it was my husband put me onto that one because he was listening to it. And one of the episodes that I really love and that I actually shared with some of the folks who report to me at work was about liking or accepting criticism, but really craving it almost, and what that means and how you can learn and grow. And I think that has really just put things into perspective, that I always found myself like in a situation where somebody's telling me this needs to be fixed, and somebody else going, oh, how can you handle that? And I was like, but then I learn, and then I don't make the mistake again. Or then I adjust how I'm presenting, how I'm talking about a topic. And so for me, it's always just been a learning experience, but it's really about how you can take criticism and not take it as a negative, but think like then using it to really shift your mindset and your approach to the next task.
I love that with that podcast stuff. Amazing. And last question, what do you do for yourself? You do a lot for other people, for your family, for Olvera Street. Do you have a practice, a focus, a habit, or daily routine that contributes to your success or your well-being?
I used to do yoga a lot, and I just haven't kept up with the practice, especially the last year. It's been a little crazy. I think I would say if I have a little nightly ritual is I love to just have a good cup of tea and maybe a little cookie and just wind down. And that's the only time that usually my husband and I get to ourselves. And so we just catch up on the day, talk and check in, and then we might veg out on a good series on Netflix.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been such a pleasure talking with you, learning about your family history, about Olvera Street's history, about Dia de los Muertos. I know everybody's going to love it, and it's been just a pleasure.
Thank you so much. This has been awesome.
On the Table with Ashley is presented by Âme Atendre, an elevated, everyday, luxury home and tableware brand with products designed to cultivate connection. You can learn more about Âme Atendre at ameatendre.com or on Instagram at Âme Atendre. By subscribing to our newsletter on the Âme Atendre website, you'll receive updates on new episodes as well as promotions relating to Âme Atendre and Âme Atendre's products. Send us an email at reachoutanytime@ameatendre.com if you have ideas for guests or series ideas you'd like to pass along. Thanks for listening.